You're listening to episode 121, Sarah's Story, a daughter with ischemic stroke. Hello, my friends. Hope you're doing well. I'm so glad that you're here this morning. We have kind of a fun, different interview. If you're an old school Child Life on Call listener, you know that way back, maybe was it 2020, 2019? I can't remember. Our friend of the show, Annie Jones, who is a certified child life specialist and also a mom to 3 and a military spouse, and is now getting back into the work world, has just been such an advocate and amazing volunteer for Child Life on Call. And she got to know Sarah through a program that she was in as part of a parenting group. And she asked Sarah to come and tell her story. So this interview is actually Annie who is interviewing Sarah, and I cannot wait for you to listen to these two amazing women. Let's get started. Before we jump into the episode, I wanted to let you guys know that if you are a parent, a child life specialist, or professional working with children, you're going to want the hospital or physician's office or urgent care that you take your kids to have the Child Life On Call app. It is an evidence-based tool designed to empower children and families during medical experiences. And 100% of the child life specialists who have used this app believe that it can help with expanding child life's reach beyond the bedside. And 100% of child life specialists believe it helps parents feel more empowered in their child's care. Learn how to get the Child Life On Call app for your facility or doctor's office by going to childlifeoncall.com/partners.
To begin with, I'd love you to just tell us about you and your family, where y'all are from, your kids, and all that kind of stuff.
Well, I live in Waco, Texas with my husband, Mark. We have been married it'll be 21 years in June, and we met at Baylor. I actually grew up in the Dallas area, and he grew up in Houston, and I never dreamed I would live in Waco, but we moved away twice and lived in Austin and Miami, but we ended up back here and have lived here 17 out of the almost 21 years. So we are rooted here. We have raised our kids here. My kids I had 3 children. My oldest son, Seth, is 15. He's a freshman. Hannah Grace is 13, and she's in 7th grade. And Adalee is a 4th grader, and she's 10. And we're busy. They're involved in different activities. I am We're involved in various things. We lead life group on Sunday mornings at church. I have the privilege of serving in music ministry. And I recently, in addition to releasing this book and, doing all of the things in ministry that the Lord had on my plate and having the opportunity to speak and offer resources to women and families, I just ended up taking a job as a mortgage consultant. I have a background in business, and it came up, and it was kind of an opportunity that was really great. So I am in training right now. My husband's an entrepreneur, and he was able to shift his schedule around to kind of help me accommodate kind of this training time. So we keep it busy. We like to travel. We love being on the lake in the summer, and we love all things kind of outdoor.
So tell us a little bit or talk a bit about the time leading up to the medical crisis that happened in y'all's family and what kind of initially happened.
Yes. Well, my daughter has no pre-existing conditions. In 2014, we were prepping for a family ski trip to Park City, Utah. My husband and I had skied in Park City for years. We had taken our older 2 when they were younger, and they went to ski school. And so 2014 was fun because my youngest daughter, Adalee, was 2. And so it was our first trip as a family of 5 going to our favorite place to snow ski. And I honestly didn't really have a before the story, other than the fact that the week before, all of my kids kind of came down with a little bit of a fever. I didn't think much about it. When you have little kids, they get all kinds of sicknesses and fevers and strep throat and croup and everything. And so this little fever virus that passed from one kid to the next didn't seem like a big deal at all. In fact, of any of the viruses, it just seemed to be the least impactful. There were no symptoms. They just kind of got it in order one after the other, had a fever for about 8 hours, and then they were done. And so that's the only thing that's a little bit pointed, because we had to kind of refer back to that as a possible cause when my daughter had a crisis. And so leading up to that, we were packing. When you travel with your family and little kids, it takes about a week to pack and do laundry. And we were doing all the things. And so that kind of happened in succession with that. And then really life was fairly chaotic and normal at the same time. And then we left our ski trip and everything just happened after the fact. And I think this is really important because, I was talking to my daughter, and we can get into what happened, but I'm going to kind of go forward and then come back again, because one of the things that her neurologist said was parents who suffer and go through, I say suffer, when a child suffers in this way and it's out of the blue, he has completely come back every single time I've talked to him about there is a version of, I hate to use the term post-traumatic stress, but he has used that term that parents can suffer every single time because there is no leading up to the event. And that doesn't make it less hard or more difficult, regardless of your situation. It's just different. And so there really wasn't anything major that we were dealing with, medically speaking, before her stroke.
Right. So then y'all went on this trip. They were all past the fevers, I assume. So what happened when y'all got there?
So we traveled. I was noticing that my daughter was quiet, Adalee. She was 2. And another thing that I will say, I had been really prepping her for this daycare center because she was 2, that at the bottom of the mountain. I had been prepping her for weeks, telling her how much fun she was going to have. And I was a little on edge because, typically she wasn't in daycare. She did 2 days a week in Mother's Day out at our church. But it was a daycare, a childcare that she and I had never been to before. So I was prepping her for that. I was very on point with my mother's intuition, thinking those things through. So we get there and I was already noticing that she was a little bit quiet. And I thought, well, maybe it's because of her surroundings. She's going to have new surroundings. Maybe she's just taking it all in. But we drove into Park City, after our flight. The 20-minute drive up into the mountains. We got there, we unloaded in the lodge, we met my sister-in-law and her family. We settled in and everything was great. And then it was the next morning when we all woke up, Adalee woke up, and I could tell something was different. She wasn't really smiling the way she normally smiled. Half of her face wasn't moving. She didn't really respond in words. Even she was pretty chatty, so she would usually respond to me in words at that point. And I just felt in my mother's intuition that something was off. And I immediately noticed it in how she responded to me or didn't respond. So I gave her breakfast. We gathered up all the kids. We got everybody into the ski school. She did great. She transitioned great into the daycare center. We get up the mountain, but I could just sense that something was off that day. I even skied poorly. I used my face as a human snowplow, fell. My husband had to pull me out of a 3-foot drift. I hurt my knee. It was just one of those days where everything seemed off. And I called it quits at 3 o'clock, went down the mountain. I was like, I need to check on her because something is not quite right. So I went down. I picked her up. She didn't respond to me when I asked her if she had a good time, and I knew immediately that something was wrong. We needed to get her to a doctor. So we called the ER nurse at our pediatrician's office back in Waco, gave her the symptoms. My husband and I were talking about what we should do. And one of the key things I think for parents is when you have a parent intuition, we always have to listen to it because we know our children better than anyone else. And this is a perfect example of that day because my husband said, let's take her to the clinic on the side of the mountain. And in my gut, I just didn't feel like that was right. I was like, I really think we need to take her straight to the hospital. He was like, no, let's just take her to the clinic. And then, if something is wrong, then they'll forward us to send her to the hospital. And I'm like, I know my husband was speaking logic into the situation. In most situations, that's the order in which you do things, one step at a time. But in this situation, my mother's gut wasn't settled with that decision. And so as I was on the phone with the nurse communicating the symptoms to her, I got off the phone. We made a decision about how we were going to move forward. The nurse called me back within 2 minutes. And she said to me, I just talked to your pediatrician. She said, do not take her to the clinic on the side of the mountain. Take her straight into Salt Lake City to the Children's Hospital. I've worked with a doctor there. It is phenomenal. Take her and take her now. And I think that message is so powerful to parents, not because just because we sometimes in those situations will ignore our intuition because we don't want to overreact, or at least that's what I was doing. It's important to think logically. It's important to go through the steps 9 times out of 10 in order. But at the same time, when there is an emergency situation or something is just completely off, our gut and our intuition as a parent is going to help guide us, and we have to listen to that.
Right.
So we rushed her into ER, and from there, the pediatric doctor on call looked at me and said, you know, I'm fearful for your daughter because I believe she's having a stroke. And so they ran a bunch of tests. He showed me how she was weakening on the entire right side of her body. Because when I was on the phone with the nurse, I noticed her legs started to dip a little bit when she was walking. And I just thought, I've never seen her do that before. So he just kind of broke it down and showed us, this is how she's debilitating right now. She's already stopped talking, and her body is, in 36 hours, will probably be paralyzed on the right side. And sure enough, by the next morning, she couldn't use the right side of her body. So we went through a bunch of tests, and it's a lot to process in the moment, because especially when it comes out of the blue. And so from there, we went through 2 weeks in the hospital to get her stable. You know, you go through the process of trying to find a cause. They didn't find a cause, which is supposed to be good news. And they called her situation a perfect storm because they couldn't find the root issue. And therefore, they just had to move forward and step by step, get her stable, get her to be able to eat and swallow, begin a little therapy. And then once she was stable, we then were transferred to an inpatient rehabilitation center in Dallas, where she would receive occupational, physical, and speech therapies for the next 6 weeks and then 2.5 years.
Wow, what a road. So how long were you away, like in Salt Lake City, and then when were you then sent at least closer to home in Dallas?
We were in Salt Lake City for 2 weeks because it was the first day of their ski trip, you know, that we had to take her in. And fortunately, in 2 weeks, she was stable. So we actually were able to fly her home on a commercial flight. We flew back into Waco. She and I literally packed our bags that night and then drove back up to Dallas so she and I could stay in the inpatient children's hospital in Dallas. It was really one of a kind. It was only like one of two inpatient hospitals like this in the nation. And so we were really fortunate that it was in our backyard and in my hometown where my family was and very close to home.
What a blessing.
We were in the rehabilitation center for 4 weeks. Initially, they thought that she could be there anywhere from 8 to 12 weeks, but her recovery was truly remarkable, and she began to immediately walk, actually during her first therapy session, which was incredible. There was a lot of prayers that went into that, and a lot of processing. I still to this day just try to process how all of that took place. But her recovery was quicker than they thought, and so she was released after 4 weeks. And then we came home to Waco, and she was in therapy for 2.5 to 3 years.
So yeah, what was that initial, did they even give you really a prognosis, or was it a day-to-day, we'll see what she can do?
So with a stroke, you learn every stroke is different. And so every patient recovery is different. So all they can tell you is that because she was 2 and a child, that children have a good chance of recovery, but they can never guarantee what that recovery looks like or what that recovery will include. So here she had lost her ability to walk and talk and use the right side of her body. they couldn't tell me what would come back because they didn't know. So I was told she would not have a 100% recovery, that it was not possible, and that in her case, a full recovery, again, a full recovery was not possible, but in her case, a full recovery would mean she could regain up to 80% of what she lost. And in her brain, it was the center of her brain that affected her speech, but it did not affect her cognitively. It affected her physically on that right side. It was an ischemic stroke on the left side of her brain. And again, I go back to the fever and the virus because research as the years progressed kind of pointed that it could possibly, but it never could conclude that there's a fever that can kind of irritate an artery in the brain. And sometimes children with strokes in this area of the brain have had a virus. So it could potentially be caused by a virus, or it was just a lot of different components coming together at the right time, at the right place to cause a perfect storm.
So her official diagnosis was what?
Ischemic stroke on the left side of your brain, and she has a good chance of recovery, but she doesn't have the opportunity for a full recovery. But they don't really outline what that looks like. And then the physical therapy doctor also told us that, he did correctly project that she would probably have 2.5 to 4 years of physical and occupational and speech therapy moving forward. I will say her speech was the last thing that she started to improve upon, but it came back very quickly. So by the time we were released from the inpatient facility to come to Waco, she no longer qualified for speech therapy. So that was really interesting to see how quickly she recovered her speech.
I wonder, for you personally, do you feel like having such a open-ended prognosis, I'm sure it was so many emotions, but was that a more hopeful, open-ended thing for you, or do you feel like that was more frustrating and discouraging?
It's funny you asked me that question because no one has ever really asked me that before. It was so out of the blue. It just feels like the rug of normality was pulled out from underneath you, and our whole life changed in an instant. So when I'm looking at my child who just lost these abilities, I was thinking forward. I had more of a resolve that said, regardless of what this child's life looks like, if I have to take care of her for the rest of my life, I will do it to the best of my ability. So I was looking ahead thinking, what is this going to look like when we get home? Do I need to go and trade in my SUV for a minivan, which will be more handicap friendly? Am I going to need to get her on a walker? Like when we were admitted into the inpatient rehabilitation center, my goal was to get her sturdy enough so that we could leave on a walker so that she didn't have to be in a wheelchair. And so those were like goals in my mind. You're just going through the motions of processing the information up front that they're giving you. And yes, it is heart-wrenching. It is gut-wrenching. I wouldn't say I felt frustrated because they said that not finding the cause of a stroke is a good thing and it's good news. And so I took that as good news because it meant that she didn't have to have heart surgery. It meant that she didn't have a major problem with her organs. She didn't have a blood disease. She was a healthy child other than this very random medical trauma that she went through, which is a very weird combination. And so I literally was just trying to process all of the information given to me so that I could make the best decision the next moment in the hospital that I had to make a decision.
I mean, I can't even imagine all the places your mind goes every second. How old were your other two at the time?
My other two children were 5 and 7. I will tell you, they handled it like champs. My husband, while I was in the hospital during the time they were skiing, was going back and forth. Unfortunately, that was only 25 minutes away. He tried to make their ski time as normal as possible. So he would go and admit them during the day so they could ski with family, be in ski school. He would go and then pick them up at ski school, feed them, get them settled down for the night, and then come back to the hospital and would just drive back and forth. And then when Adalee and I had to go back to Dallas, he stayed in Waco. He handled his business. He handled my business. And fortunately, he was able to work from home so that he could keep them in preschool and first grade and keep their life and rhythm as normal as possible.
That's awesome. That's so important, just that they could have that normalcy. Did they really grasp kind of what was going on, or did they get to come visit very much when y'all were at rehab and in the hospital?
They did get to come and visit, and I thought for children that they grasped the situation, I think, as best they could. And one of the first visits that they came was the day that Adalee was released from the pediatric intensive care unit. And they came, and Mark had told them what was going on. When they arrived, she was in her wheelchair because they had wheeled her up to the patient room that day, and they wheeled her around the hospital children's floor and showed her all of the little paintings on the wall and ceiling. And it was really precious. They just really embraced her as is. And what was really incredible, it was good for her, Adalee, to have them around because it made her situation feel normal. Because for a 2-year-old, it's pretty traumatic. So to have her brother and sister around, just playing with her, talking to her, it just made her, I think, feel a little bit normal. It kind of lifted her spirits.
All siblings, I feel like, adore each other in some ways, but the younger ones just look to their older ones so much. That's so special they could be there.
I will say, too, of course, we dealt with moments where you can tell they're dealing with the issue. Moving forward, as we were released from the hospital, came home, we had people drop off gift baskets, things for us to take to the hospital. And we had some very smart friends who also put a gift basket together for Seth and Hannah. Because you can't forget those other siblings because it affects them too. And my 5-year-old Hannah at the time, she said a couple times, well, why does Adalee get all of the gifts? Why is she so special? And, of course that's normal. And I would tell her, honey, this is for you too. I know this is hard and people are thinking about you just as much as they're thinking about her because this is affecting all of us. And it's very thoughtful that they brought you this item. And I think that's really important because the other kids, I do find in some situations, it can be really easy for them to feel overlooked.
Yeah, absolutely. And that kind of, one of my questions I was thinking about is looking back, what were things that other people did for y'all that kind of stand out as that was really creative or very helpful? And it sounds like maybe giving stuff for your other kids was one of those things.
Yes, absolutely. They put a basket together specifically for Seth and Hannah of just toys and coloring books, items that they could take with them to the hospital while they had to visit. Because we let them play, but they couldn't get too out of control. They had to, still be on their good behavior. We're in a hospital environment. And so things that they could take with them, because even though they weren't the patient, they were still dealing with it. And that was really helpful. We also had some friends who had just been through an experience with an extended hospital stay. Their newborn daughter had been born with Down syndrome, and she had a heart surgery about 6 weeks before Adalee went into the hospital. Or actually, she had a heart surgery when she was born. So what they did for us is they put a bin together of all of the hospital items that I would need, because we had so many friends putting together toys and stuffed animals for the kids and for Adalee, but she put a bin together for me of towels and bath mats and different items that I would need at an extended hospital stay. And that was really helpful because I had never had a hospital stay longer than just going and having my children when they were born. I didn't know what I was going to need. And so she brought me what I was going to need before I knew I needed it. And that was really, really helpful. She included disposable plates, disposable cups, just different things like that. And then the next thing that I remember is we had some friends who took my son on their spring break because it happened in February. So we were in the hospital over spring break. And they took my son on their family ranch spring break trip where the boys got to do paintball and ranch things all day. They got to go fishing and doing all of the things that boys need to get out there and do to run off energy. And he had the time of his life where my daughter Hannah got to go with my sister and cousins and parents to take the kids and have fun. And so that's very reassuring to know that your children are in good hands and that they're having fun, they're not miserable, and they're not dwelling on the situation.
Such thoughtful friends, especially over spring break, for those little things that would be so easy to forget about what everyone else is doing. So what were some maybe unexpected blessings or positive memories that stand out to you with Adalee?
First day she was in rehab, she began to run. So here we are, we're told that, it's quite possible she might never walk again. They can't guarantee anything. And so we had flown in, we'd been in the hospital 2 weeks, we flew in from Salt Lake City, we're packing, we're turning around overnight, we're getting up there. Well, I've been in the hospital with sick kid, all these children on the floor, and I came down with a horrible case of strep throat. And so that next morning I was told, okay, you can't be treated here. You have to go to a clinic outside the hospital. So my parents came and took Adalee to her first therapy session while I went to a clinic and got treated for strep. I was gone for about 2.5 hours. When I left, my parents and my dad were holding Adalee because she could not walk and walking down the hallway to her therapy. When I got back, she was standing holding my dad's hand, and my parents were clapping and laughing, and my dad was looking at this video. Her therapy session had just ended, and here she was standing, walking alongside of him, and he was saying, "You won't believe what happened. Look, she ran in therapy," and he got her to start walking. So she went from not walking at all in her first therapy session, and she got up and she started running. And I am a person of great faith. I think that there were a lot of prayers that went into that. The staff had no way of expressing what happened. They really didn't know what to do with her. They didn't really know how to verbalize something like this. That I don't think they had ever seen this type of recovery before. And I didn't know. I'm thinking, can this happen? I don't know. And I still process it today because I really prayed over her walking again and that she'd be able to run. I just never expected that she'd do it in her first therapy session. So, I know that there are people who pray and ask for prayer when a child is going through a medical issue. And sometimes our prayers turn out the way we want, and sometimes they don't. But that leads me to my other point, is we had such an incredible support of family and friends in our hometowns and our family. And it was so many people just loving and praying and supporting us that lifted us up in a way that was incredible, because when you have that type of support, it will help you get through the toughest situations.
Oh, absolutely. And that's what I was going to ask that too, of was the staff like, oh yeah, cool?
They really didn't know how to respond. I did hear several things over the course of her recovery. One was like, well, we really haven't seen this before, or we're really surprised at how quickly she's recovering. We're trying to validate with the insurance, like the insurance, if she recovers so quickly, they can't, justify her continuing to stay here. I mean, those kinds of things where they're trying to just look at the business end of things and try to figure out, okay, what's going on here? They just really couldn't verbalize it very well. You could tell that they weren't used to seeing that type of recovery or a child just walking overnight. And I certainly didn't expect it either. Now, again, she was running. She had a little limp She was running with a little limp. And so they were very adamant about putting a safety belt around her so that we could hold the safety belt. They were very concerned about her falling down, which in the hallway, I don't think she ever did. Thank goodness. And I had a hard time keeping the safety belt on her because she did not want to wear it. And when a 2-year-old doesn't want to do something, it's very difficult to get them to cooperate. And so it was just kind of one of those things where there was constant back and forth of everyone's concerned about the situation. They're just trying to look out for her best interest. So.
Right. And it sounds like, and you said the speech took a little bit longer, but how is this still impacting her in physical ways, or have y'all kind of moved past it and are just in the processing stage?
Yes, so great question. There have been milestones where by the time that she was released from the hospital, I say hospital, inpatient rehabilitation center, a month later, she could go function as a normal child, but she still had to really be in a lot of therapy several times a week to get that right arm and leg strong so that it looked normal. But most people looking at her would not have known what she had just been through. So there were definitely things that we had to address along the way, maybe like the way her foot would turn. We had to put a insert in her shoe, 6 months after that. And it caused her hips to be just slightly uneven to where last Tuesday when we were visiting her neurologist for her annual appointment, it was just so minor that she doesn't deal with anything physically. He looked at her and he's like, she's perfect. She runs perfectly. Great. But we also did a lot of therapy and put a lot of work into it. And yes, there are wonderful miracles that can happen, but we also put the work in it. We followed the doctor's orders. We did what they told us to do. We made it a priority for her to be in therapy. And I shifted my whole business schedule. We shifted my whole day around so that was a priority to get her to where she needs to be. So she doesn't have those issues that she's dealing with today. And so we're very, very thankful. If you look at her, you would never know. In fact, her neurologist said that there's no reason for us to visit him anymore. We'll just telecommute from here on out.
Wow, that's incredible.
I will say too, there have been some learning things we've had to work through, even though she was not affected cognitively. She was affected in the speech part of her brain, which does affect reading. Now, we cannot conclude 100% that it was from the stroke, but the way reading process works, I feel very confident to say I lean in that direction. So we did have to, by the 3rd grade, we're able to kind of put a little bit of a diagnosis in place for a reading deficiency, but she has overcome that with a plan that we've had in place and partnering with Robbins College at Baylor University, as well as the specialist at her school here in Waco. We have come together with a plan, and it's a very unique plan. It's not like any other child in her school because no other child has had a stroke. So it's components of dyslexia, but it's not a classic case of dyslexia. And it's very hard for teachers to assess, but we finally got there, and she's doing great. She's doing well. She has an 85 in reading and 85 in language arts, and we are just so pleased with the progress, especially over the past year.
That's incredible. She sounds like a very motivated person.
Being the youngest child, I think that has to do with it. The youngest children, they want to keep up with the older ones, right? And there is something to be said for that because they will work hard to be a part of what's going on, they don't want to miss anything. And so she kept up, and that was her goal. She was very determined. But I can already tell you this has developed a very hard-working characteristic in her life because she has had to overcome some of those reading challenges. And those kids learn to compensate, whether it's physically, and she has had to compensate a little bit from her right hand. She now plays basketball, and she loves it, and she practiced on her left hand, which she's now left-hand dominant, because that right side will always be a little bit weaker, but it doesn't prevent her from doing anything. And she dribbles great with that left hand. And the other thing I was going to mention was her neurologist several years ago, almost 6 years ago now, looked at me. He's like, she can be a normal kid. She won't be a soccer star, no contact sports, and she won't be a track star. He said, but she'll live a normal life. But we let her be in sports, and we've let her do the things, of course, abiding by safety, and being watchful. But it was funny because last month she qualified as a fourth grader to be on the track team in their field day, and not all the kids qualify it. And so I got to tell the doctor, hey, look, this is how to overcome what she was told she can't do. And there's been a lot of hard work and dedication to get her to that point. So we're really thankful for that.
Right. No, it sounds like she is motivated. She is a hard worker. If you think back to, and even now, what is something you feel like you're really proud of yourself for? Maybe in those first days or the first few years that you're like, I did that, or I thought that, or I advocated for that. I don't know if something stands out for you.
Well, the word you just said is advocate. And as a parent, like I had previously mentioned, I felt so much resolve. And I knew I had to be her advocate as her mom. I know her better than anyone else. And so when the doctors would give me information, I would ask questions. I would really probably exhaust them with questions, but I took on the knowledge that I had to take on. I had to think ahead, and I'm very proud of the way we advocated for her, the way we took initiative, the way we asked questions, the way if I saw, that she was limping a little or that it was affecting her growth, I would initiate it with the doctors as soon as I could, because the sooner you act, the better. In fact, I was so proud that we acted so quickly, because with children in strokes, we educate people now on acting fast. If people haven't heard the acronym, you want to act fast when you notice a difference in their face, in their speech, or, in any type of walking scenario, because the sooner they get treatment, the less long-term issues they will have, stereotypically speaking. And so they say to act quickly. And so I am proud of how we advocated. I'm proud of how we acted quickly, because I do think it made a difference.
We'll be right back. If you have ever wondered where you could get those cloth dolls that child life specialists use with kids for medical education or sending home to siblings or to draw on for therapeutic activities, then you don't have to wonder any longer, because our friends at Smile Makers have decided to now sell these amazing cloth dolls for a very affordable price. I know that when I was in the hospital, I would have to rely on a volunteer network to then give us the dolls, which was really nice, but I had to wait a lot of times. Like, I would need a doll now and I wasn't able to get it. So this is a great place to be able to go get your procedure dolls at smilemakers.com. And y'all, they have 3 different skin tones for these cloth procedure dolls. In addition, you can actually buy a procedure doll prep bundle that comes with fabric markers. This is a fabulous way to do your medical teaching, to help siblings feel involved, to get kids creative, to do a lot of teaching about different diagnoses. And so go to smilemakers.com so you can get your cloth dolls as soon as possible before they run out. And when you go to that checkout to get your cloth dolls, also type in OnCall20 and you will get 20% off your entire order. So not just the cloth dolls. So if you get a bundle for Child Life Specialists, if you get a piece of furniture, if you get one of their really cool toys and prizes, or you order a large sticker order from them, OnCall20 gets you 20% off your whole order. That's smilemakers.com, code OnCall20 to get 20% off.
What would you tell parents maybe that get the same diagnosis, or even just that kind of out of the blue sudden medical crisis? Is there advice you feel like you wish you'd known yourself, or that you would give now?
I think the biggest piece of advice is listen to the doctors, follow their instruction. But just because a doctor says that a child won't ever be able to do something, you can have hope and be realistic at the same time. I was prepared for our life to look different, and I had to be okay with that. And so I prepared for that. Now, we were able to go back to a normal life, but it still is not our old normal. It was a new normal. And I think you have to just move one step at a time to embrace that new normal. I do think another piece of advice for parents and caregivers is to figure out a way how to take care of yourself, because you internalize stress. Stress will end up having an impact on you physically. And so for me, I know this sounds exhausting, but one of the things I was able to do was, of course, with support from my husband, get up early in the morning, get an early morning workout in. It started at 5:30 and I'd be done by 6:30, because I knew if I didn't get it done then, I would not be able to balance it in the days where I was managing small children, I had a business, and trying to get Adalee to therapy. And so I did put the business aside a little bit and was able to do that because we had business partners. But really taking care of myself physically helped me to get a lot of the stress out, mentally and emotionally. And that was really, really a good choice for me at the time. And I look back on that and I'm so thankful that I had a husband and friends around me to support me in that.
You know, I've always wished that was my motivating factor, and I just can't get myself to do it.
Well, and I think that's, it's interesting. It's different for everyone.
Sure.
I talked to a mom that said, I just need to be able to read 30 minutes of my favorite novel. Whatever it is that you can do that is your self-care, that helps you escape the stress so that your body can release that. Whatever it is, I would encourage parents to try to find time to do that. And that's really, really hard to find time to do that. I know, because caring for a child going through a medical crisis is 24/7 issue. And I will tell you, sometimes when you go through trauma, there's a delayed response. In fact, it was 3 years after it happened, I actually started having a series of panic attacks. And at the time, I was actually dealing with insurance issues with therapies. And the medical issue and insurance issue, when you have a medical crisis on top of everything else, is so stressful. And so at first I thought maybe I had developed asthma. And then I found out later, about 2 months later, that they were actually panic attacks. But I had never had panic attacks before in my life. So I didn't know that's what it was. And so, that stress does come out in different forms. And so it is so important to try to find a way to take care of yourself.
No, I think that's a really good point too, of the kind of residual effects for you as the caregiver, that sometimes you can get in that headspace in the moment and just advocate, be there, and maybe you collapse after 2 days, or maybe it takes, like you said, 3 years for things to kind of slowly hit and process through. And I'm sure, like, having people around you and things to help you, sometimes you realize it right away. Sometimes it may take other people, but I think that's good to be aware of. I hadn't thought of that. I know that you have written a book. I'd love to hear a little bit about that.
Yes, I did. I wrote a devotional called A Perfect Storm, because what got me through this scenario was my faith. And I had friends together with a gift basket. It was our life group with the church that we go to. They actually brought a gift basket, and in the gift basket was a series of scriptures. And I leaned on that for strength. And for me, that sustained me. And it just lifted me up during that time. It lifted my whole family up. And there were so many lessons that I learned from that. And so I just felt very compelled in sharing the story. And this story is also intertwined with a friend of mine's testimony about how when we go through something difficult, we can then in turn help other people who are going through similar situations. And so my friend is actually a featured guest in this story as well. And it is Adalee's story and our journey. It is a journey of our medical crisis, but is wrapped in our faith. And it has become a resource for parents who are grieving, parents who are going through a hard time, and even parents who have lost a child. Because my friend Shelly Reeves lost a child during the time, and right after I got home from the hospital with Adalee, and she tells how our situation actually encouraged her as she actually walked through something that was much harder in losing a child. And so the devotional is called A Perfect Storm because that is what the doctors told me happened to Adalee. Like I said before, it had to be just the right components, just the right time and place that come together to create this whirlwind, this perfect storm. And what I've found is that so many people relate to that because regardless of our situations or the medical crisis that we are going through with our kids, so much of the time it feels like a perfect storm that we are navigating. And especially over the last couple of years, it's resonated even more with people as we have dealt with unprecedented times. And so, again, there's a devotional. It's a 28-day devotional. It's a perfect storm. And we've had the opportunity for it to be a resource for parents.
That's awesome. And yes, especially in light of recent years, there's been lots of perfect storms, and even in recent weeks. So what are some other resources? I know you talked about or mentioned a few earlier, some other resources you'd recommend for parents that are facing these same challenges?
That's a great question. One of the new resources that I'm about to tap into and hopefully become a contributor to is called the International Pediatric Stroke Association. They are putting this association together, and they're actually in 2 weeks having a conference in Vienna, Austria. And Adalee's neurologist will be going and presenting with his research findings for children who are recovering from strokes. But what they're putting together online is a resource and guide on the day-to-day aftermath for parents, practical tips, pieces of advice, things that we've been talking about on this podcast. How do you take care of yourself? How do you reach out and find a good therapist? What are ways that you can manage your day-to-day routine? How do you handle a child going through therapy? The other resource that I think of off the top of my head was a resource that I found actually through Scottish Rite Hospital. We were dealing with Children's Hospital, and they were wonderful, but at one point I had a little bit of a problem with some of the insurance. And I called a social worker at Scottish Rite Hospital, and she referred me to United Children's Foundation. Now, it is not the insurance. It is an organization for families who do not qualify for Medicaid or Medicare, but maybe they've had good insurance, but the bills are so incredibly hard to keep up with, and they can pile on so quickly that those are the parents that fit the mold in order to be able to apply for a grant. And you give a lot of information about what your child has been through, how much money you've had to pay out of insurance and out of pocket, and they actually will go and pay a portion of your bills. And so it is a financial burden. And so we actually were able to work with them 1 year because we were small business owners. And so we had some resources, but as all small business owners know, you can only afford so much. And they helped us pay a few of those bills with some grants. And so that is an incredible resource for parents because of the financial burden that they can go through.
Oh, absolutely. Whether it's like a day or a long extended stay, for sure. Those are great ideas. And that new resource sounds incredible. I'm really excited for that.
When we go through something in life, we have the opportunity to continue to look inward, or we have the opportunity to grow and heal. And I believe one of the things and ways we can grow and heal is to turn outward and to try to focus on how we can use our own experiences to minister or to reach out or to support other people who are going through similar experiences. And I think that's one of the greatest lessons I learned out of this story is we can continue to look inward. And there is a time when you're going through trauma, you have to look inward because you have to deal with things. But once you move to a place where you are kind of past the acute situation, we have the opportunity to look up and to look outward and to see how we can reach out. Because you can reach out to someone, but if you've never been through a similar experience, sometimes you don't know what to say. Sometimes you don't even know what someone needs. But when you have been through an experience, you know maybe the right words. You know the tools that they need to take to the hospital. You know how to care for their kids. And you know how to support them in the way that you are supported.
I think that's so wise and so true. And I love to hear that, just even as a mom in general, of, there's days, but look past it and look up and out. But also I love just how you talked about the necessity too of just putting in the work too. Like sometimes there are incredible leaps that happen medically for no reason, like Adalee running, but then you also still have to do the day-to-day, and there are therapies and there are things. And I love that you talked about that, and also just trusting your intuition as a caregiver from small things of like, I think we should maybe go to a bigger hospital. I think that that's so powerful. So I'm so grateful that I have gotten to hear your story, that our listeners are going to get to hear your story. So thank you so much for taking the time to do this.
Thank you so much, Annie. I really appreciate you allowing me to share.
Thank you for listening to the Child Life On Call podcast. I'm your host, Katie Taylor, and you can follow us at Child Life On Call on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Please rate and review to make it easier for other families to find us. We have cute merch available at www.bonfire.com/store/Child Life On Call, and you can listen to more episodes and find resources at childlifepodcast.com.